evening's coffee night exchange, where we will be hosting a speaker with an interesting story that we have already informed you about a little bit, and our moderator. We are grateful to both and looking forward to an interesting exchange. So our speaker, Jason Howk, will talk about, as a Baptist Army veteran, his journey with Islam. Our moderator this evening, Pastor Joe Rainey, is currently the lead pastor at Covenant Church in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And he's a sought-after speaker, and in addition to his pastoral duties, serves on the adjunct faculty of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, Wake Forest, North Carolina. So, Jason, thank you very much for being with us this evening. And Joel, over to you now. Thanks.
My pleasure, Ibrahim. Thanks for having me. Merhaba to my Turkish friends. I have missed you deeply, and especially the privilege that I used to have that I didn't even realize what a privilege it was to just be able to drive to DC. We're in West Virginia, but our church is just a short distance from the district, to be able to see you guys. And I really look forward to some days when this virus is behind us and we can be together again. Thanks for the honor and the trust you're instilling in me and being able to host tonight. And I got the opportunity to meet Major Howk a few days ago. Major Howk is retired from, I believe it's the Air Force. He can correct me on that, but I think he was in Army. See, here we go. I've already made the mistake. So he's a retired Army officer. He spent 20 years focused on the broader Middle East. And of course, you can't focus on the Middle East without focusing on Islam. Worked with the Department of Defense in a variety of capacities there. He currently is the host of a podcast called We're Just Talking About It, that explains Islam to non-Muslims in plain English. For 5 years, he led religious dialogue discussions about Islam across the United States, seeking to dispel myths and stereotypes. For 29 years, he's conducted defense, diplomacy, education, and intelligence missions around the globe. He has a master's degree in Middle East and South Asia security studies from the Naval Postgraduate School. He studied Dari and Afghan Farsi and Arabic at the Defense Language Institute. He was a term member in the Council on Foreign Relations, is sought after by journalists for his insights. And as Ibrahim has already shared, he comes to us from a background as a Vermont Baptist. Now, you may think those two terms don't belong together. I grew up as a part of the Southern Baptist Convention, and I always thought Baptists were confined to the South. So a Baptist in Vermont's kind of a unicorn. Although a little known piece of history is that the first American Baptists actually gathered in Providence, Rhode Island. So you actually have a better legacy up there, Major Howk, than you might think. But welcome, and I'm delighted, and I know the folks here are anxious to hear you share about your journey and what we have to learn from it tonight. I'm going to have a few questions for you afterwards, but let's dive right in. Major Howk, thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Hey, I'm glad to be here. I appreciate this chance to talk about what I've been doing. And I actually come from a family of Baptist preachers all the way back to horseback that came over from Switzerland. So yeah, we've got a little bit of history back up there in the north. But I lived in Florida and grew up in Florida Baptist churches as well. So I've seen both sides of a religion that didn't know the other existed. But my journey, as you said, has taken me all across the Middle East and into many Muslim majority nations where I worked hand in hand with Muslims through most of my career, and Muslims inside the U.S. government and the military and other agencies and departments. So this has kind of been a strange journey for me. It's not what I thought I'd be doing when I retired from the Army, but I fell into this kind of interfaith, interreligious dialogue and work, and it's been a blessing to take part in this. So what are some of the big questions you want to hit
Okay.
on tonight, and I can jump in and around and answer things as we go along.
Sure. Well, why don't we do this? If any of you have a question, you can either write your question in the chat bar, or you can just raise your hand in the chat bar, and we'll recognize you at the appropriate time, and then let you unmute your mic, or Major Howk and I can just read the question. So we'll go off of that. Jason, let me ask you first. Just talk a little bit about, because you and I both been around the block talking to both Christians and Muslims, both people of strong conviction. And oftentimes there's misunderstanding one side has of the other. Talk about some of the fears that you've encountered on both sides of this attempted discussion and how you address those.
Yeah, absolutely. That was probably the first thing I had to figure out when I jumped into this. I was teaching a class on Afghanistan, actually at a local library. And after my class, I gave 30 minutes of Q&A, and not one question from the audience was about Afghanistan. Every question centered around Islam and Muslim cultures. I said, all right, I'm probably teaching the wrong subject here. We were 15 years into the war, but nobody wanted to know about that. They wanted to know about religion. So I scheduled another class to come back and talk about Islam, just a 101 course, and the room was standing room only. And I said, okay, I think I know where I need to be talking. So I started getting questions like this, and I think these are the ones that cued me in that I need to keep talking and go talk to anybody who wanted me to speak, whether it was a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner. I've done it at people's houses. I go to churches, I go to auditoriums, you name it. I've gone and spoken there, over a couple hundred audiences at this point. Some of the first questions I always get from an audience are, how do I tell the good Muslims from the bad ones? And take a second to think about that question. You know, could you imagine saying that about anybody else in America? And how do you answer that? And so I usually just give them the old refrain. Well, how do you know if your neighbor is a good neighbor or a bad neighbor? You get to know them, you know, and if you don't know somebody, Ernest Hemingway once said, the only way to figure out if you can trust somebody is to trust them, you know, and that's kind of the first step that led me into this. But I also get questions like, you know, why do Muslims hate America? Or why are all terrorists Muslims? And as I dig down into these questions and answers with audiences, and I always tell them, just throw it out there, whatever's on your mind. It's not, I don't record them. It's not for attribution. I don't go out and, you know, put a name to these questions, but I always try to get people to just think about, you know, what's driving your question? You know, why do you know that? Most of the responses I get when I talk to an audience, most people in America have never met a Muslim. And I've wandered all over the country, from Northeast out west, way up to northern Michigan, down into Florida. Most people that come to my talks have never met a Muslim in their life, and they probably never will. I mean, it's such a small religious group in our country. So they get their insights about Islam and Muslim communities from the news, which is not a good place to get insights on anything these days. You know, they get their insights from movies and television, which, you know, are always chock full of some bad guy. And for the last 20 years, that bad guy has usually been Muslim. So I think what my big takeaway from these questions, and I try to answer them without any prejudice on my part. I don't think people say these things because they're hateful or they're racist. They ask the questions because they really don't know, and they don't know where to get information that they feel like they can trust. And so I think that kind of underlines everything I do when I speak, and I write it in all my books when I give out a book at a book talk, is education and tolerance. Without education, we're never going to overcome all these stereotypes and misperceptions. There are not enough Muslim people in America to go befriend every American citizen who's not Muslim and explain to them, no, really, I have a great family. So it's going to take a lot of people having an honest conversation. And I'm glad things like this exist to help further that.
Yeah, that's excellent. And it actually prompts another question, Jason. How do you tell a good Baptist from a bad one?
You know, I think a good Baptist talks about forgiveness, and a bad one talks about everything else.
Really? We'll just leave it at that. Well, you mentioned a personal experience, and obviously you had rich personal experience during your service abroad. And as someone whose freedoms were guarded by that protection, thank you for your service. I've never even told you that in private. What Talk a little bit about those relationships, because you talk about not only are they friendly, but that you came to a place in some sense of dependency on them in many cases while you served there, and that they came through for you. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wrote an op-ed yesterday with Congressman Waltz out of Florida and a former Afghan interpreter who worked with a bunch of my old infantry buddies in Afghanistan, keeping them alive. And he's now here safely in America because his family was hunted down for helping us. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, and I depended on Afghans to keep me safe, to keep me alive in a couple of instances, truly to stop me from being shot. And that gave me a real sense of trust in certain people, and it led me to get to know them. And I put this in the front of my Quran. I'll just read a couple things that I took away from my service in Muslim majority countries and working beside Muslims every day. And I'll just rattle off a couple of these. And I put them in the front of my Quran because I think most Americans who've never met somebody who's Muslim or really been immersed in Muslim culture they don't understand this, but they'll understand what I'm saying when I throw these out there. That forgiveness is honorable, that only God can judge other people, that kindness to strangers is never wasted, that you should share your food and drink with guests, even if it's the last bite of food you have. You should be fair at all times in business. You should care for children. You should have a pure love for God and respect. You can be sober and still have a joyful life. You say hello to everyone you meet and wish them peace, happiness, and safety. I love to bring that one to the American streets. You should never be prideful, extravagant, or wasteful. Prayer should be humble and private. You should give to charity. Hard work is honorable. Education is valuable. Leaders must earn respect. You should always respect your elders. I think those were, that's just a few of the things I wrote down and some of the lessons I took from being in Muslim cultures. And I always thought when I was in there and I saw those things, and I'm not saying, these cultures are perfect. I've been in plenty of places where I saw horrible things in Muslim majority countries, and I see horrible things in America every day too, in every country I've ever visited. But when I was seeing the best of Muslim cultures and my Muslim friends, they reminded me of my grandfather, who was from that long line of Baptist preachers that rode around on horseback and taught sermons at whatever church they ended up in. Just be gentle, be kind, be forgiving, be protective, care for one another. I didn't see anything different that I didn't grow up with when I was in Muslim majority countries. And in some cases, some of the best things I grew up with were amplified. And I love that.
Yeah, it's excellent. There's actually a question here from Christine. How might we speak to the common good? Where do we agree and intersect? I think you probably just answered that question for us, because with all of our differences, and we know we have them, there's nothing you said that in your experience exemplified Muslim majority culture that would not have been true for my own Protestant work ethic that I was raised with in the American South. I think there are so many commonalities there, and that is very helpful. Turning though to one of those differences, Pamela Smith asked this question regarding an experience she had with an imam after 9/11, who spoke about his understanding of jihad as an interior, more of an internal struggle. I'm just going to add to that I have heard and affirm that understanding by the vast majority of Muslims around the world, and it's really comparable in some ways to when Christians talk about warfare in the spiritual sense, or when we talk about fighting the enemy, or we talk about doing spiritual battle, or when we sing an old hymn like "Onward, Christian Soldiers." We don't really mean that we're about to lock and load and go find an enemy to kill, but as you have presented that to people, do you find people receptive to that? And do they, when you go, well, they're talking about an internal struggle, does the average person buy that?
I think most people would struggle with the two different, and my Quran is actually focused on explaining that difference. That's one of the things I put in there. every time the word jihad is used in the Quran, I actually write it in English there. This translation actually means jihad. And I think it's only in there, a dozen times, talking about, in most cases, a struggle internal, but some cases, there were wars in the Quran, just like there are wars in the Bible. So I always try to make that point, that there are two different ways. And the big, struggle or strife that most people have in Islam is to be a better Muslim. And I often equate it to, remember those "What Would Jesus Do" bracelets that everybody was wearing? That was all about the personal struggle for Christians to be more like Jesus. That's exactly what that was. It was jihad on your wrist, if you're a Christian, to say every day, if I'm in doubt, I should look at my wrist and go, well, the right answer is to do what Jesus would have done. And that is the larger jihad of not protecting your country from invasion, from non-Muslims who are trying to wipe out your country, which is really what the stories in the Quran are about. They're trying to save their religion. They're being hunted down by non-Muslims who aren't Christians or Jews, just non-Muslims, idol worshipers mostly. That larger jihad is the struggle to be a better Muslim. And I struggle every day to be a better Christian and fail every day. And everybody who struggles in any religion to follow their religion fails every day, but should struggle every day. And that's what that discussion is about. I'd say most people, it's a deep topic, and most people are going to go with whatever they see on the news or something that sounds, catchy, or, if you think you're going to hate all Muslims, you're never going to accept these theological discussions about a religion. But if you have an open mind, I think most people can grasp these different concepts.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Now you've used a possessive on something here that I want to address. You talk about my Quran.
Yeah.
But you're not a Muslim, right? But you have one. I have one too, by the way. It's on my tablet. It's the same tablet I'm going to preach from on Sunday. I won't be preaching from the Quran. Sorry, Ibrahim, I don't do that. But I have my ESV Bible on one, and then I slide it to the left, and there's a Quran. So just as one guy to another who happens to have read that book is just doesn't happen to be a Muslim. Do people find that weird that you do?
So I wander around the country. I teach courses, and I hold up the Quran interpretation that I wrote. And it's got tabs on it. It's like every study Bible I've ever owned. It's the one I translated. It's the one I use to get things out of. But yeah, it sounds funny when I say it, but it sits on a shelf next to my Bible that was given to me, by someone else that I love. And it's all my other Qurans sit on another shelf chock full of Bibles that were given to me throughout my career, from family and from the military. Even most soldiers get handed a Bible when they deploy, but you can pick up a Quran if that's your book of choice. Right. So yeah, there's probably some faces. My wife sometimes at book talks is minding the book sale table, if people want to buy a copy, and yeah, she gets lots of interesting questions from people who won't say it to me when they walk by.
I'm sure. But here's the thing: you went you went several steps further. Actually, you have actually been the lead on a project for a modern translation into English. And so I'm wondering what would motivate a guy like you to take on a project like that?
I started before I started doing interfaith talks and explaining Islam to non-Muslims. I was actually was doing a lot of writing when I retired from the Army, and I was working to summarize the Bible. Literally just take what are the big things out of each chapter, because I'd often had to explain Christianity to people in other countries. So I was like, what are the big takeaways from each chapter of the Bible? I was still in the Old Testament, pretty early days, when I started getting called to go explain Islam. And I said, well, what if I were to take and summarize the Quran? And then I started doing that. I got about 2 chapters in, and I said, this isn't going to explain it very well. If I summarize it, someone's going to say, well, you took out the part that I know is in there that's evil. And it's okay. So I skipped the summarize, and I just went for a straight interpretation. And I thought back on all the Qurans that I was ever handed in my career as I was trying to learn Islam, because I'm working in a country where everybody's Muslim and I need to know their religion. And they were hard to understand. And so that led me to change how I was going to interpret the Quran and put it into a book form. I wanted to make it chronological because traditionally the chapters are not in the 23 order in which they were given. So I put it chronologically so you can follow the story, because it's a 23-year story. That's hard to follow out of order. And I put it in very modern English because I wanted to make sure I removed all the words left over from the 1600s and the 1700s. They're still there in many English translations where they just, if they don't feel like translating the Arabic, they just use the old English words. I mean, it's some of these versions out there sound like Beowulf. They're just impossible to read. So I wanted to bring it up to speed to language, English language that we use in modern usage today, and removed everything outdated. I didn't want anybody to feel like they were studying for the SAT when they're trying to read a book. It makes it, something easy to put down. So, and I was successful.
Equivalent to the King James version, basically.
Yeah. Really, if you try to speed read the King James version, it can be painful, unless you grew up on it and you just know half of what it means anyways. And I got a really good response from one of my buddies who was going to Iraq, and I gave him a copy on his way out the door. And he said, Jason, I read it in 2 weeks just on the helicopter rides. That's all I did was pull it out of my bag on helicopter rides, and I got through it in 2 weeks. It's easy to read. And that was my goal, to make something anybody, especially anybody in the government who's going in and out of the country and has to know something quickly, something they could read on the plane and literally get through it. So.
Excellent. Now we do have a question here. You know this as well as I do, that around the world, in the history of the world, faith can be used to strengthen people, bring communities together. It can be used to draw people closer to God. Faith also can be used as a power play, right? It can be weaponized. It can be politicized. We're seeing elements of that in our own country right now as we get closer to the election. And we all know in this room, Islam is no exception to that rule. And so there's a question here from Mike about what you might say to us about political Islam, that politicized version that is covered most of the time on news in news media when Islam is covered. What would you say about political Islam as its relationship to the wider religion?
Yeah, that is actually a topic I spent a large portion of my career on, is trying to understand where religion and politics intersect in whatever country I was working in. It's important. You need to know that. You need to know it in America. If you ever want to make president or get to the Senate, you better know where religion and politics mix. So I use the word Islamism, which is, putting the ism on the end of it. It shows you it's a political ideology based on religion. And there is a Islamist, organization in just about every Muslim majority country. They want their politics to be based on the religion purely. There's also a huge group of people who don't want that because they get religion enough. They get 5 prayers a day. They don't want to have religion be the driving force of politics. So I speak about that a lot, and it's the reason probably a lot of people come to my talks. I usually name it, Islam, Islamism, and ISIS. I don't call it interfaith. I want people to come and have a discussion with me. So that's one of the things I always cover in my courses and talks. It is a political ideology. Think of fascism or communism, but this is a religious angle. Imagine if a Mormon was elected tomorrow president and he said, we're going to be following Mormonism now. I'm just going to take, these books that I study, and that's what I'm going to base everything upon. There'd be a backlash. And in most countries there is. Most Muslims, especially those under 30 today around the world, do not want more religion in their life. All the temples and mosques and churches are losing people, quickly. And so that Islamism is really finding a hard wall in a lot of Muslim majority countries. People don't want it, and they're pushing back against it really hard. And when that's used by groups like ISIS, where they don't care about voting, they'll just kill you if you don't like their brand of Islamism. That's a different story. Now you're getting terrorist groups that are, sucking up anything they can to recruit people and twist it in any way they can to weaponize people against other people. So we see that as well. There are Christian terrorist organizations in the world. There, is probably a genocide that occurred against Muslims in Asia, done by Buddhists. We're going through that right now. And
Yeah.
So yes, any religion can be weaponized, but breaking apart religion from politics, from terrorist organizations, I think is a great way to learn more about what's going on in what we call the Muslim world and Muslim majority countries, because that's how most Muslims in those countries think about it. My religion's separate. Why are people mixing it up with terrorism or politics? I don't want that. It doesn't. Most people don't. People don't want it in America. You know, we're kind of born on separating those things.
Gotcha. Very good. Very good. So, just a personal question here, because we've already established you're still a Christian, but you've done all this work among Muslims about Islam. You travel all over the place talking about Islam. You're not defending Islam so much, but you are defending Muslims and saying, hey, this is not what you think it is, which is a Christian value. We're not supposed to bear false witness against our neighbor. And I'm certainly glad to see you do that. But I have to ask, as a pastor, what's your pastor think about this? Is he nervous?
Yeah.
Does he support this?
So I a lot like my grandfather, I don't go to church as much. I go to different churches wherever I am, and I have throughout my career. When you travel as much as I do, you perform religion where you can. But as I've spoken to churches, and I've been invited to speak at different churches around the country as well, I've found a mixed reception. It always depends on the pastor. Some pastors are happy to have me come in, and they're not happy when they hear what I have to say, that you should have tolerance towards other religions. And their congregation is happy I came, and they thank me for explaining a complex issue. And then their pastor badmouths me the next Sunday and calls me that Muslim guy. So if you get into this game, it really depends on, I think, the religious person you're talking to and how they personally feel about Islam or Muslims. Right now, I spend most of my time working with a Methodist church in my community because the pastor there, you know, he's a couple years younger than me, and his views are all about tolerance and forgiveness and understanding, and that's what he sees. So I spend more time. I would go take a service there, or I'll go help him on projects. I'm not too tied to any particular structure, any building that has a name on the front of it, as much as I am towards religion. So.
Well, and I know you and I talked off screen a little bit a couple of days ago about the background for that. Is you did get a lot of pushback, particularly from having grown up Baptist from some of the Baptist churches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a couple of the Baptist preachers around here invited me in and then badmouthed me and never invited me back to speak or attend. You know, I don't even go to their churches for friends' funerals. You know, I just if you don't feel welcome somewhere, I've always felt it's best not to be there.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the challenge too. And there's actually a question here from Larry: is what kind of pushback have you gotten from Baptists? Which kind of prompted my question as well. But it's prefaced with this: I think of Baptists as more Jesus is the only way to God than many Protestant denominations. And though the church I pastor is multi-denominational, with people that come from all different backgrounds, we're just we call ourselves generic evangelicals. But we are evangelicals in the sense that I have to be honest and say that would fit our church's theological conviction. Ibrahim and our friends at Rumi Forum know that. They know that about me. They've known that about me ever since. And we respect each other, right? There are Muslims who are going to believe until their dying day that I'm not going to make it to heaven because I believe Jesus is God. And our church, conversely, believes that no one can get to heaven unless they believe Jesus is God. And that's what philosophers call an irreconcilable difference, right? And but at the same time, tolerance means whatever you think is going to happen in the next world, God put you in this one together. And you've got to figure out some way to share it and some way to respect each other. And so talk with us in these final moments here before we get into some resources that might help us. What can pastors like me, what do you think evangelicals can do? Because here's the good news, and I'm going to answer Larry's question. Not all Baptists are like the ones Jason encountered. Not all evangelicals are. And generally speaking, the younger they get, the more open they are. Their theology may be exactly the same as their father and grandfather, but their approach is very, very different. And so I have a lot of great hope there. But what can those churches, what can they do to facilitate these relationships and this greater understanding?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'll just emphasize, I don't think it's a Baptist thing. I have gotten pushback from lots of different preachers and many different hats and denominations, and outside of Protestants as well. So, and I've heard it from, believe me, I've gotten an earful from Muslims as well. What are you doing talking about Islam? If you're not Muslim, you shouldn't be doing this. So there are a lot of people, like you said, who think there's only their way to get to heaven and everybody else is going to hell. So, that's just, they don't want to get along. And I think the key is to get along. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I spoke to a Rotary, and that question came up from a gentleman who said, I'm a pastor at a church, and I always see at the mosque, I can see the mosque from my church, and I always see the people at the mosque. And the women are covered, and they always seem very insular, and I don't see them talking to anybody else. How do you said you have to befriend people to get to know them. How do I do that? And I said, well, funny enough, Muslims like to have food. So, and I know Baptists like to have food. So maybe if they meet on Friday and you meet on Sunday, maybe on Saturday you could have a joint fellowship where everybody brings food and just gets to know each other. And I've always used the term that food is a weapon of peace. When I travel and worked around the world, you get more work done and more deals struck and more education and more understanding over food than you will over anything else. The Russians might argue it's vodka, but believe me, it's food. If you sit and you talk with another person and you're eating the food that they cooked and it's good, you will get to know them and want to be their friend because you want to get invited to have more of that food. But besides just the food being good, that is an easy opportunity for any denomination. And I grew up Baptist. I didn't even know Catholics were Christian. Every denomination of different religions should be able to share a meal and just be friends, especially if their temples, mosques, or synagogues are within eye shot of each other. If you can see another person who is also religious and has a faith, you just don't understand it, why not share a meal? You don't have to have, and I've been to sermons where it's a joint session where we'll have a Jewish opening, and then the Buddhist will speak and the Muslim speaks and the Christian speak, and that's nice. It's kumbaya and it's wonderful to hear the theology, but everything really got sorted out afterwards when we ate a meal together. And I think it's an easy, non-confrontational way to get to know other people and just call it what it is. It's just a fellowship with other faithful people. And that's it. Just leave it at that. It doesn't matter how you think you're getting to heaven or avoiding hell. If you're faithful, you should probably want to get to know each other, because the fastest growing religion in the world is non-faith. And that is going to be the largest group of humans here shortly. And within 30 years, I think more people in the world will not have a faith than have a faith.
Yeah. And I'll go one further than that, Jason. I would say, as someone on the Christian side, go eat Muslim food. All right. Don't just invite them. Go eat like right across the street from one of the largest mosques in the state of Maryland. It's about 30 minutes from here. I hope it's okay, Abraham, to advertise a business. It's called the Tulip Grill. It's in Frederick, Maryland. My friend Ali, that's the best lamb. The only lamb I've ever had, guys, that ever tasted better was in Turkey. In Urfa. This stuff is really, really good, but that's the place, right? Just like Baptists go to the fried chicken place after Sunday service, this is where these people went after Friday prayers. And so if you want to get into conversation and eat some amazing food, our church has had that business to cater in when we've invited in and hosted the Muslim community in our own environment. And I just want to echo what you've said. Get some food that everyone can eat, respect people's dietary restrictions, of course, and just sit around and get to know each other and leave with indigestion, man. It's a wonderful thing. It's just great. I love it. Resources. I want to just kind of be prepared to list some resources for us. I do want to mention a couple here that my friends at Rumi Forum have given me permission to share with you all. One is a podcast called Crossing Faiths. My good friend Matt Hawkins, who's formerly with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. He's now a Ph.D. student at Southeastern Seminary. where I'm honored to teach adjunctively, has teamed up with John Pina. And so you have an evangelical and a Muslim, and they're talking about current issues, politics, culture, and the like. But the title of that podcast is simply Crossing Faiths. And the other thing I'd like to point you to is the work of something called the One America movement. This is a movement started by a friend of mine named Andrew Hanauer. And we started a chapter in our area. Our church was a founding charter member of One America West Virginia. And we have partners in that, which include Adas Israel, a Jewish synagogue in Northwest DC, and Adams Mosque in the Dulles Airport area. And so you got Christians, Jews, and Muslims recognizing our disagreements with each other, but teaming up to fight opioid addiction, which probably affects my area even more than it affects theirs. So just a couple of ways that you can kind of bridge the gap. And for people of really strong faith, that's the thing I always want to tell, particularly to my evangelical brothers and sisters. You don't have to compromise your faith. Muslims don't either, if they're exclusivist, and many of them are. You don't have to compromise your faith on what you believe about the next world in order to do a better job sharing this one. So I think those two resources would be great. You can find them on the web. Jason, do you have anything else that you'd like to share, or maybe you would send us to Google and say, look this up?
Yeah, I wanted to share a couple of resources and then my lessons that I've learned from speaking about Islam and just talking about religion to over a couple hundred audiences across the country. First, if you want to understand Islam, you need to read the Quran. Find an English interpretation. Find one that's modern. You can find mine on Amazon. Have at it. It's in ebook as well. I don't like the ebook stuff, but people like that. I have a podcast as well, which I started with a military spouse, and it's called We're Just Talking About It, because that's literally what we do. She's Catholic, I'm Protestant. We talk about Islam, and we do that for numerous episodes, kind of an Islam 101 discussion. We go over a lot of the questions I get in big audiences, so you can listen to it in your own time. And then we spent the next, probably 25, 30 episodes with different Muslims from around the world coming on, doing Q&A with them and letting them say in their own words what Islam means to them and what they've gone through. And it runs the gamut, from women who are working on their judicial doctorate in Islamic law to women who have left Islam and whose parents are, irate with them for leaving religion. So we talk to a lot of different people, and it's really fascinating. And so for the lessons that I've learned speaking about Islam, and these are the tricks, I think, if you want to talk about religion, Islam in particular, but if you want to talk about religion in general and have a civil discussion, I think these are the big things to take away. One, people are not bigots. And we hear the term racists and bigots thrown around against anybody who doesn't understand Islam. We call them Islamophobes if they don't understand Islam. I will tell you that is the quickest way to not have an audience listen to you ever again. I have never used those words. I don't use those words. If you use them, no one's listening to you. So you have to walk in thinking, you know what? I'll bet most of these people just don't know a Muslim, and let me try to help them understand. That's it. It's not ignorance out of hatred. It's ignorance because they don't know. Just like I would be very ignorant in a physics class right now. I don't remember a dang thing about physics. Not because I hate it. I just don't get it. I know I'll fall if I'm up high, but that's about it. Stereotyping happens in every direction. I get the number of Muslims I've met who stereotype Christians and Jewish people. It makes my hair stand on end to hear some of the things they say. And it's the equivalent of the things that non-Muslims say about Muslims. So if you think anybody's perfect in this game, you're definitely entering the wrong category.
Yeah. Those are some great observations. In fact, there's a comment here from Christine, and I think this is what she's getting at. She talks about linguistic social media reduction, that we're using keywords and phrases, and sometimes they just turn people off, right?
Absolutely.
You stop the conversation with anybody except those who already agree with you.
Yep, absolutely. And I think the whole goal of interfaith or interreligious dialogue is to get as many people in the room as possible that have different opinions and try to get them to listen to each other. And you're not there to change someone's mind, really. It's just to get them to listen. I always joke, I go to a lot of interfaith events that other people host, and outside all the cars have a bumper sticker that says coexist on it. And I know right off the bat, this is a useless waste of my time because everybody inside that building agrees with each other. So who cares? You missed the whole purpose of this enterprise, which is to get people in the room that don't agree with each other and have a discussion. And so when I tell that in interfaith rooms, they're always like, "Whoa, no, we're doing great things." I'm like, "Really? Did you change your mind today?" No, you didn't reach anybody, and actually you insulted anybody who walked in here who already doesn't believe in your little words that you use to describe things, and little boxes you put people in. I think the big one that I've also learned, and I have been very strict on it, politics cannot enter this discussion. If you let anybody get political, or if you get political, and I mean if you bring up a name of a human being who's been elected to office in any of these discussions, you lose 50% of your audience immediately. This country is divided politically. It has been for a long time. It's a pretty hot topic right now. I am just the worst. If I hear somebody start to hint at politics, I shut them down immediately, and I will not in any way put it in what I talk about. It just kills it. And so many people love to put it in there because it's interesting. I get scolded if I go on television. I'll get news reporters that are like, "Man, I thought you were going to fight and argue and really tear into that person." No, I'm here to have a civil dialogue. If we're not doing that, we're wasting people's times. So that's probably one of the really critical ones. And then the last one I'll leave you with, if you're going to build tolerance, and I think education is the key to it, the message is important. What you say and how you say it is important, but actually the messenger is more important than the message right now. I can go into a room of 250 people and stand on a stage and speak to them about Islam, and they will listen to me. They will say things that most Muslims don't want to hear. They will ask questions that most Muslims would be uncomfortable asking, but they came to the room because I was speaking. And I've done this back to back with Muslim preachers, on one Sunday, and I follow the next Sunday, or vice versa. And the tone in the room and the questions they ask is completely the opposite. And the people that show up are completely the opposite. So I think we got to find messengers that are willing to go out. And I'm always looking for Muslims that want to go into the mosque and explain Christianity and Judaism, because it has to be in all directions. Me doing this is one side of the puzzle. There's got to be people sitting on all different sides of the table doing the same thing. And that's where we move this conversation forward, I think.
Yeah, because it is that's the very definition of understanding, is it not? And and even as you talked about the polarization in the nation around the election, around politics, and I agree with you. I think we actually do need to talk about that, but I think you're absolutely right that in a context like this, you can't take two highly polarized subjects and put them in a blender at this moment in time. That would just not work out very well. So just get to know the person across the table from you, and try to leave those other hot topics out of it, at least for the moment.
That's a good one. One hot topic at a time.
One hot topic at a time. Yeah, that'd be good. So in your estimation, I think this is kind of a last question. This is from Mike. In your estimation, does Islam need reform or change in any meaningful way?
It's an interesting topic. I get that question a lot. Has it gone through its reform? I always remind people how young Islam is compared to all other world religions. Christianity is a little bit older, but also very young, compared to 4,000 or 5,000 years old in some other cases. So I actually think, and it's not for me to decide or anybody else whether a religion goes through a reform. I think religions just do go through reforms. And I think we're watching a reform in Islam right now. There has been a big push, and from some countries that have a lot of money, that have been talking about Islam, who spend a lot of money building mosques, distributing literature, hiring preachers, and they are changing the way they speak about Islam. I remember in 2016, I was at a Middle East specialist conference in DC, 700 people in the room, and a Saudi minister flew over from Riyadh and was speaking to us candidly at lunch. And he said, "My country has decided that it is not spoken about Islam in a very positive way. The way we have been talking about religion has not been helpful to the world. and we want to change that. And the jaws dropped that this guy would say, we haven't always done this very well, which is a huge thing in any, government or religion, to admit, you know what, maybe we're not doing this the way we should be. And I'm seeing a movement of that as I talk to Muslims around the world. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about, what they want, especially a lot of women that I speak to that are Muslim, that, they want to go back to very specific things and change some of the things that may have been pulled in the wrong direction. So I think every religion's constantly reforming, having a reformation every other week, probably. There's a new Protestant sect that I think pops up every 2 weeks. But I think that if you looked closely at what's going on in Islam in the world today, I think there are multiple reformations happening in different countries, and that will change things. It's probably going to happen shortly again with Christianity.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is happening with Christianity.
Yeah.
You talked about new branches of Protestantism. There's been a new charismatic version of Catholicism that's emerged in the last 20 years.
Yep. Absolutely.
There are all kinds of, there's new Anglicanism that's coming around the bend. And so what happens is you have to decide as a faith community, okay, what's our core? What are the things that can't change? Otherwise, you have syncretism and you just kind of blend into nothing, right? And so I'm sure Islam will have to do that. They'll be the judge of that, not me or you, as you rightly said. But I imagine the 5 pillars will still be there when they get on the other side of this. Just like with us, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus will still be there. Even though from culture to culture and decade to decade, century to century, we're going to contextualize ourselves to the needs that we perceive that exist in the culture of the time. And if you don't do that, you will, if you don't apply those central tenets of your faith to the culture of the moment in a way that will bring glimpses, tangible glimpses of that spiritual reality, then you will lose your relevance rather quickly. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Major, thank you for joining us tonight. And I just want to say again, thanks, deep thanks. I know this is an office of trust, and I hope I've honored your trust tonight. My Rumi Forum friends, Mehmet, Ibrahim, and to others, thank you so much. And Ibrahim, I'll turn it back over to you, my friend.
Heartfelt thanks, Jason and Joel, for this, illuminating, engaging conversation. So your very question at the beginning, how do you tell apart a good Baptist from a bad Baptist, reminded me of of a great couple that I neighbored in my apartment in Jerusalem, an American Baptist couple who were schoolmates and who were always great neighbors. So I think that answer goes across the spectrum, this notion of being good neighbors. They were always there with me, despite a plethora of differences in our ideas. They were in the Holy Land with very strong commitments about its future, and we didn't share many thoughts, but they were such great neighbors. So maybe an angle to that question. And so I think we picked a very good word by saying journey when we announced this event. So our patriarch Abraham was on a journey for his entire life. One of his stops was my hometown, the biblical Haran, and your story really connects, your service in uniforms and your service to the community with a whole different hat. That's quite a journey. That's what I would call a very fruitful journey. And a note on the very interesting question of reform. I totally agree that the current status quo is causing a lot of religion fatigue and disillusionment and questioning of religion, especially in the growing younger masses in the entire Islamic world. And as a Muslim, I'm happy to observe that people are asking very bold questions, and they are coming up very, very bold, creative answers, especially, and that's the gift of this country and the rest of the free world, especially in contexts where free debate is welcome and not only welcome, but also cherished. So in the times of status quo, it is difficult to ask questions. If someone dares to ask them, it is difficult to give the answer, to be vocal in the answer you think. But United States and a number of settings across the world where these discussions are happening with no fear of political oppression are helping Muslims to in their journey of renewal, reform, whatever one who wants to call it. So ending with that note, I thank everyone for their participation, their questions, and look forward to continuing the conversation with many interesting topics and speakers. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to see you soon in the upcoming Rumi Forum events. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Salam.
Khudafez.
Hafiz.